We're already learning that for tokenization to work, it needs to operate within existing financial regulation. Right? It's not going to be any different. And we're seeing now with the Bitcoin ETF, for example, that some of those regulations are starting to come. We're starting to get some precedents, and we know the financial side of it is getting better.
When it comes to DePIN, it might not be individual, it might be corporation, but you still need to identify who the participants are. And how can we work around this identity layer to have a proper and secure and transparent governance in place?
I do believe whether we do trust AI will heavily rely on the question, how do we govern AI? And then eventually, what is the ultimate human backstop for that AI governance? And I very, very much believe we will have to have an ultimate human backstop, and that must not be centralized.
Today on the show, we are discussing DePIN or decentralized physical infrastructure, network, and the role of governance. DePIN is a revolutionary approach that bridges the gap between infrastructure ownership and service delivery, basically between the digital and the physical world. So basically it's an application of blockchain technology enabling decentralized deployment and operation of physical infrastructure. So that means IoT, telecommunication, basically connecting the globe on a global scale, but also empowering all the contributors, the stakeholders that participate in the infrastructure. So most of them will be devices. That's why it's really a revolution for the IoT and data industry. Obviously, we said there is a lot of data. So when there is a lot of data, we need to guarantee integrity of those data, security of those data. We need to guarantee also the right incentive for the ecosystem participant to be rewarded. So there are lots of questions that raise a bigger question about how we are going to approach governance, decentralized governance, or perhaps an hybrid between centralized and decentralized governance for DePIN. We are at a very early stage of this discovery. Governance is still something that we are not discussing enough. It's not something that makes the news yet, but it's something very important when we are talking about any use case of decentralized application. And definitely something that I wanted to discuss on our channel. I couldn't think of anybody better than David Palmer to join the show with Nicolas Biagosch. They are two leaders in the space of telecommunication, IoT, data, decentralized technologies. So David is a global innovator, is a digital visionary. He has been the lead for blockchain technology at Vodafone business for many, many years. And he is also one of the co-founder of an identity digital asset product that Vodafone has been developing. And Nicolas Biagosch is a co-founder of Q, which is one of the few projects that is looking at governance solution and how you can actually have a secure governance in Web3. So today is a super interesting discussion. I have to say, we raise a lot of questions rather than giving answers just because we are just so early. So if you have any question about DePIN and governance or any feedback or anything else you will add to our conversation that maybe we can bring back in another interview, please reach out to us on social media. Twitter is pretty good, or LinkedIn, you can DM me directly, or you can send me an email at steffi@financialfox.news. We love to have your contribution. We love to hear your feedback, your input, and that's the only way that we can bring valuable content on our podcast and add value to our community of viewers, listeners. And remember, education is paramount when it comes down to technology, and especially when it comes down to emerging, or I would say, frontier technology like blockchain. Remember that all the content in our channel is for informational purposes. I sometimes share my opinion, but you should never act at the back of that or at the back of any opinion shared by our guests. You always need to do your own research, do your own due diligence about any project that is mentioned on the show. Hi, David. Hi, Nicolas. Great to have you on the show today.
Great to be here,
Hello.
Steffi. Nice to meet you, Nicholas.
Nice to meet you, and thanks for having us.
Brilliant. So let's start as usual with a short introduction so we can set the scenes and our audience can better understand who you are and what you focus on.
My name is Nicolas Biagosch. I've been in Web 1, telecommunications, Web 2, Web 3 for over 25 years. My background is law and business. I was trained as a lawyer in Germany and the United States. I have a business degree from London Business School. I worked in Web 1 in the late 90s, then got into telecoms, worked on the board of a big telecoms operator, doing all kinds of governance and regulation, M&A work. I was the CEO of a mobile phone operator in Germany, Simyo, for 5 years. And after that company was sold to Telefonica, I went into Web 3. And have done a couple of things there, amongst which is Q Protocol, which is a decentralized governance framework for Web3.
I'm the Chief Product Officer for Vodafone by Peerpoint, which is a new IoT fintech Web3 platform, which has been launched over the last 2 years to basically support IoT to IoT device transactions, which are automated. I've been helping Vodafone in the wider sort of arena look at Web3 and blockchain over maybe the past 5 years, and was part of a panel which basically looked at 4 POCs back 4 or 5 years ago, which we were going to take to MVP. Peerpoint Economy of Things Web3 fintech platform is one of them, which has gone live, but there's also solutions for roaming, supply chain, contracting, and carrier services, which have also gone live within the group. So part of my main thing is looking at how we can merge cellular with Web3, and more recently how we can merge cellular with Web3 and AI.
Fantastic. Well, this is going to be a very interesting conversation. I wanted to focus on DePIN, which has become a very interesting area of investment, but also of development as well. And David, you mentioned about IoT, and that's where all comes in as well. So if we introduce DePIN, which is obviously decentralized, no, obviously, maybe not for many, but is decentralized physical infrastructure networks, and is basically a revolutionary approach that bridge the gap between infrastructure ownerships and service delivery, basically kind of connecting the digital to the physical world. David, get us your definition. Tell us why DePIN has become a prominent area of development with, over the last year, and really what blockchain technology can bring to the table.
So first of all, for many, many years, a lot of us who are in Web3 have been talking about tokenization, right? And the tokenization of assets being one of the killer applications of blockchain, right? Obviously, there's been a lot of time waiting for regulation to catch up, waiting for confidence to catch up, waiting for financial institutions to enter the market. But the idea of being able to tokenize assets, and bring new liquidity, fractionalize them, is something that obviously, could complement some of the financial products that we have today. So the point I'm making is that tokenization is a key part of DePIN. Right, and you've got obviously tokenization of digital assets. NFTs have got a lot of notoriety for digital ownership, but actually a fungible token as well, an ERC20 in Ethereum language. It is also a way of tokenizing digital assets. Now, if you look at DePIN, so DePIN stands for Decentralized Public Infrastructure Networks. Essentially, what you're looking at is, can you tokenize infrastructure, and can the investment be brought in within that structure? networks, right? So if you, for example, had a telco network, could you tokenize that network, and could people buy tokens to utilize that network? Some of the DePINs that we've seen, the most famous one, I suppose, is Helium. Which, Helium being what you call a mesh network. Its mission statement was as a mesh network, where essentially you're using, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth direct to form peer-to-peer communication networks. And then you have these Helium bubbles, which are using these sort of mesh networks. But actually, they also buy airtime from telcos and provide a product which is a combination of mesh and real airtime. But the key thing is that, for example, where you have, the need for infrastructure. So in, countries with low coverage or areas with low coverage where you don't have the means for public investment, DePIN, could be a good way of getting communities together or interested stakeholders to fund infrastructure. Telco being one, it could be electricity, it could be roads, etc. So I think DePINs have a big role to play. But key to it is tokenization. It's about tokenizing these infrastructure networks, and that as a means to investment. The other side of it is something we've been working on, which is what we call Web3 asset as a service. And it's the same sort of principle, essentially, where assets, so something we were working on was electronic vehicle chargers, where essentially there's a mandate in Europe for 2.4 million of these things to be deployed over the next year by 2025. And we was just thinking, okay, could you have a means where essentially the financer could be a traditional financial institution, or it could even be a manufacturer of charge points, could go into business with a shopping mall or something else. But the key thing with Web3 asset as a service is that investor would get paid back for each charge every time there's a transaction. And IoT comes into it because we can tell where the charger is, we can verify the transactions took place, we can tell the SIM hasn't been swapped. But actually, the smart contract Web3 technology would actually distribute the funds based on the equity in token value that they have of the chargers. So I see those two things working together. I see DePIN playing a very, very big role for communities to get involved in infrastructure. But I also see that on the commercial side, things like Web3 asset as a service are also important. But they're all based on tokenization.
Brilliant. I think that was a great overview. Now, here there are a lot of data. They are moving between telecommunication, IoT. So how can we guarantee data security, data transparency, verification, and perhaps, Nicolas, you can come in and explain to us. This is all a great idea to have all the world interconnected and the community being rewarded. As you said, David, I think that incentive aspect is great. But how we can guarantee integrity and security of the data? They are the key part of this infrastructure of the future.
So regulation is always a big one. So if you think of like Wi-Fi networks that come together or other elements, then how do you include regulatory requirements into a rule set that will then have to apply to all of the DePIN network? Another question would be, those networks might be or transcend nation states. They might be maybe not global, but they might cross borders. How do you deal with that? Where you then have different nation-state jurisdictions. In international trade, the solution is to find a private realm, like a private contract, private rules, and then private arbitration to do this. And we have the same in roaming. So there are international roaming agreements. These are private agreements, and then these agreements have private arbitration as a dispute resolution. So we already have a couple of other elements there where we see exactly these things play out. Only for what we're doing today, these are all very centralized owned or centrally owned networks. So if we think about DePIN, we think about a decentralized ownership. And then the question is, how does that work? Who can change the rules to that? Who can grant me certain rights other than just, like the token? And what does the token, what do I need the token for? These are just a couple of elements. Then voting, how do you facilitate voting of a global community that build a network? And maybe that's a really big vision, but I think the principles do apply.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned quite a few. So, David, where do you want to start? We have got the element on the interoperability, which was quite interesting, and the international trade. And then obviously we have got the community voting and that. Which aspect you want to start focusing on, and then we can go through them all.
Yeah, I would just say that DePIN is a means of putting funding and owning and governing infrastructure, and it happens to be a Web3 tokenized method of doing that. I wouldn't say it has to be completely decentralized, because there's few things that are completely decentralized, but you have elements of it which incorporate what I call trust as a service. But it's the same. A lot of the principles are similar to cloud. I remember when we had our sort of physical data centers, and the idea of moving assets and data from physical data centers to virtual machines was unheard of, right? Especially public cloud was absolutely unheard of, and now that is how things are stored. I think when you look at the security of data with DePIN, yes. I think one of the key things about telcos and other utilities, electricity companies, etc., is that we're trusted. We're trusted with critical infrastructure, and I wouldn't expect that a model like DePIN would take over fully. I see it as more being complementary. I think, Nicholas, you're absolutely right. There needs to be a governance structure. There needs to be standards. There needs to be watchdogs, and other things that ensure that privacy is safe and security is there, and that we protect against attacks or misuse of this infrastructure. But that aside, I would see that it would be used to complement, say, for example, a telco infrastructure or electricity in areas where that infrastructure isn't sufficient or investment is needed. That would simply be it. But it operates under the same governance structure, the same rules, the same regulations as normal infrastructure would operate under. The other thing I would say in terms of how you move it forwards, obviously this again cannot work in isolation. People can invest in different things. Obviously, mesh networks, Helium has been a great example of telecommunications. But as I said, it could be as simple as chargers, right? It could be a community in a rural area getting together to buy chargers, chargers for their electric vehicles where the business case wouldn't add up elsewhere. And then the question is, right, what does the model work? What are the components to that model? So one would be the community getting together. Now it could be in the form of a DAO, but as Nicolas said, when you get non-deterministic things that happen, like a shock, DAOs and smart contracts don't respond very well, right? Because it's never happened before, or it's outside of the objectives. So that could be limited, or it could be another form of ownership structure, community ownership structure. But the bottom line is that the community would get together. You'd have an ownership structure, you'd have a token structure which would get investment in the infrastructure, and then you'd have a governance and operational structure. But they need to be worked on. Now, what I would say is that there's been a lot of attention on the investment structure, right? As with most things in Web3, it's about, we can launch a token to build a network of satellite cellular masts. And we can build a satellite telco network. Fine, right? So you can get the investment in, but how are you going to operate it? How are you going to run it? How are you going to ensure regulation, etc.? And I think those things are a work in progress, right? And in some cases, the regulations are unclear. In some cases, willingness to follow them or acknowledge or incorporate them are slow. But my point is that DePIN is nothing new. Right, it's tokenization. We're already learning that for tokenization to work, it needs to operate within existing financial regulations. Right, it's not going to be any different. And we're seeing now with some of the Bitcoin ETF, for example, that some of those regulations are starting to come. We're starting to get some precedents, and we know the financial side of it is getting better. So on the tokenization side, I think that is better. What is not clear is whether there would be things like tax relief where communities are getting together to put in infrastructure that should be public infrastructure, or how they can charge on it and stuff. So there's some legislation and some regulation and some decisions that need to be made where essentially you've got people coming together to put in public infrastructure, which is to the good of many. But then you have to look at the operational side and how that would work, and how communities can get together as Nicolas was saying, and vote and how that works in practice, whether it's legally binding. One thing that is very clear and has become very clear is that things like DePIN, tokenization, DeFi cannot exist in isolation. They have to operate, if they're going to get adoption, within existing regulations and existing laws, and people need to have recourse to legal regulation and protections. And to that aspect, I don't think DePIN is any different.
I could not agree more that DePIN, like most others, will not exist in or cannot exist in isolation. I also do agree that where you use existing networks that are provided by big telco corporations, and where you do have the trust with the telcos, and you do have already those international relations between different kind of telcos, I think that you already do have a lot of the infrastructure in place. I don't see this happening, as it's not right now, but also in the future I see the big challenges where we find like new kinds of networks that are evolving, like the one that you mentioned with the chargers, or like back in the days, like 15 years ago, we've already looked at like Wi-Fi mesh networks and these kind of things. So we've been there before, we just didn't think of it like being really decentralized because we were in a solely centralized world. And especially like in our view back then, also me with the telco, is like you couldn't have a more centralized view of the world. It's everything revolves around yourself, and that will be different. And that's where we're seeing with what Q protocol is doing. We do see that there are ways to govern beyond just deterministic code-based votings and so forth. So with the infrastructure that is available through, for example, Q protocol, we do see that there are decentralized autonomous organizations that actually have value and that are governing value, where you can spin up a lot more sophisticated voting schemes than just like one token, one vote, and the whole community votes and everything, which is very crude, it's very simple, and will not sustain, like the wisdom of the crowd, if you will, is only good for a couple of things. For most things, you will need some expert opinion, you will need expert decision making, but at the same time, those decisions need to be within like a scope of discretion, if you will, work within those. And then the question is, who sets those up? So I think that we're on a really good way to provide these frameworks on there. And that's, as I said, like that's what Q protocol has been focusing on, and where we have first really interesting cases. Also combining kind of the off-chain world and the on-chain world for things that you cannot code as a deterministic oracle, which could be all the way to like implementing decisions that have been taken by courts or regulatory bodies and executing them or enforcing them on chain. Things like that we're doing today already. So like even also for DePIN, we can see this happening, where you have a combination of on-the-ground regulation, which is, as you're saying, like DePIN can never exist in isolation. So you always have to have an integration with the existing on-the-ground regulation.
There is also an element that I just want to bring up, is one of the main challenge, and that's where always regulation has question, is about identity of the stakeholders. And when it comes to DePIN, it might not be individual, it might be corporation, but you still need to identify who the participants are. And how can we work around this identity layer for, to have a proper and secure and transparent governance in place?
On the identity, I really see that like for the identity, the question really is like, for which purpose? Because, if you are able to define a node of whatever sort, or part of the infrastructure, a piece of infrastructure that is a part of a bigger network, or could become a part of a bit bigger network as an identity, that then the question is like, do you have to have this really transparently, or is it sufficient to have it anonymous, like a node on a blockchain? Like a validator node on a blockchain today is or can be anonymous, and it's perfectly fine. It's actually advantageous to do it that way in order to provide for a sufficient mentioned decentralization. I would be really interested to hear from David what they have implemented as a system. You said, David, you already have an ID system running. We've looked at many ID systems because within Q we're still looking for an ID system. We have implemented like a first version of it based on passports. I would be super interested to understand how your system works for DePIN, because I believe that infrastructure identification or as identification is way more relevant than a passport of a person running that infrastructure. But I might be wrong.
How this solution that you have created with Vodafone integrate for DePIN and deal with identity?
Yeah, so for DePIN, we do not do pure DePIN. So the platform that I'm responsible for, PeerPoint, digital asset broker, basically implements what we call Web3 asset as a service. So that is essentially giving infrastructure, so EV chargers, drones, other infrastructure devices, interoperable digital identity, and attaching a smart contract to that identity in a wallet, so that essentially investors in that infrastructure can be paid back whatever is agreed in the smart contract, normally relative to their token holding. We also in that system have been working with things like tokenized bank deposits, so that money from bank deposits can be moved into tokens, and then we can, using the smart contract, get the investment back. So that's what we've implemented. In terms of DePIN and identity, clearly you've got two sides to it, right? So you've got the person identity, and this is meeting KYC and AML, which is nothing new, but having a person identity which can be verified, right? And the ability to pay verified, and their ability and other credentials. So it could be that you could only invest in this infrastructure if you live in a certain location, or if you're a certain age, or whatever. And those, being able to verify that identity would be pretty important. So having a person identity that can be, where the key credentials can be issued by a trusted issuer and verified, is something that we worked on as Vodafone in terms of what we call decentralized digital identity. And we also, for scale, link that to things like Mobile Connect. So Mobile Connect, when you go and buy something, or you're using your card, and they say, okay, we're going to send you a text message to verify your location or verify you are who you are. This is Mobile Connect. So we use Mobile Connect, and we also use what we call decentralized identifiers, which are basically in line with the WC3 standards for person identification. But our real thing at PeerPoint is the identity of devices, right? So we can give cars a digital identity, we can give other devices a digital identity, we can link payment credentials to those digital identities. We have encryption using the SIM card, which allows those devices with that digital identity to side. So essentially you've got, in the DePIN infrastructure, you've got devices that can be located, where activity can be verified, where they can send and receive payment, and they can encrypt data and sign for transactions. So that's what we bring to DePIN, and we operate at the layer 2. But we also acknowledge the likes of IoT and Peak and Helium and these guys who are operating at layer 1, who are pure DePIN sort of protocols, where essentially they provide the infrastructure and the functionality to issue the tokens and to put to get the infrastructure out. As I said, we take a slightly different approach, but I believe that the digital identity of the infrastructure devices will be critical to business models going forward.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned at the beginning the work that you're doing on the AI side. My question will be, are you focusing more, or perhaps on DePIN, what we should pay more attention is predictive AI rather than generative AI? Can you just give me more insight what type of artificial intelligence is integrated or is needed or can be used to empower DePIN?
I mean, DePIN is an infrastructure, right? The question is, how do you make that infrastructure more efficient? How can you link that infrastructure with people and their experiences and sort of user journeys more efficiently? And that's where AI is used, for example, in electronic vehicle charging for predictive maintenance, right? To basically look at things so that chargers can be maximized in terms of uptime and that they don't go wrong. So that's the that is that's still AI. There's still learning models. There's still algorithms that are being run to do that. But it's more back end. In terms of generative AI, I think that's just the beginning, right? So there's different ways that we participate. Some is in the processing, right, which is a big part of AI. But some of the other sides is just simply how does AI work? It needs data, right? How do you get what produces the most data? Well, it's us and IoT devices. So some of the things that we've been working on is how you can essentially link data that's produced by IoT devices. 75% of it isn't used at the moment, but how can we get that into large language models? How can we feed that into AI, and help people to monetize the devices, but also get a richer data set for AI models. But in answer to your question, Steffi, I think it's both. Obviously, the buzzword is about generative AI, and generative AI, will have a big impact on DePIN. It may help build DePIN. It may help market DePIN. There's so many areas where in the future, this technology will have an impact. But at the moment, I think we're in the early days, right? And OpenAI, which ChatGPT, etc., are based on, are really consumer and standard B2B focused at the moment.
And Nicolas, how artificial intelligence impact the governance of DePIN, or could impact? We are still early, but it would be interesting to know what thoughts you are or what you're thinking about it.
So there are, I think, two aspects to that. So first of all is, of course, like how can we use or can AI be used in the governance of DePIN, and that's then essentially the governance of anything. And I think that in any governance structure, decision making or support of decision making, we will see more and more AI, because the basis of any decision, and governance is essentially about decision making. Like rules, who can take a decision, on which basis, under which circumstances, which are the requirements, and so forth, and then the enforcement of those. That's essentially, and dispute resolution. That's governance. And the basis of every decision making is the question: do we have the relevant information? That's an area where AI will be, where we will see a lot more AI. I think that's also one of the things David mentions, where efficiency gains can be achieved with AI to not only get more information but also get better information, more relevant information, relevant for a decision, and then a lot of more simple decisions probably can be, maybe in a first step, be prepared for with AI or using AI, and eventually, once we rely on AI more, done by AI. So like it's almost like asking a decision-making body that is trained to make difficult decisions to do the decisions. It's like in a country, you ask politicians, government, like whatever, to prepare and do decisions for the people who own the country in a good society, maybe, or like one I like. And then a lot of these ideas can then be substituted with AI if we do trust the AI and if the results are better than the human results. I believe, and that gets me to the second part of the answer, I do believe whether we do trust and to which extent we do trust AI will heavily rely on the question, how do we govern AI? How do we design the space in which like the scope of discretion in which an AI can play freely? How do we change that space once external factors, like either the AI is evolving or external factors need to come into play or build into the system? And then eventually, what is the ultimate human backstop for that AI governance like? And I personally, I very, very much believe we will have to have an ultimate human backstop, and that must not be centralized, because I don't believe that there's anyone in the world, no telco, no nation state, no group of people that is able or should be in control of something as powerful as, like, in the future, like really powerful AIs. So we will have to find a way to decentrally provide a human backstop to say, like, this is enough. Well, here we stop for a moment and step back and think, and then maybe go forward. That's what I think where a lot of these questions hinge. And right now it's a big wild west with AI, and everybody's just using it and not thinking about any consequences, which is amazing because it really fosters innovation. I just really hope that we'll find good ways of governing that, because we've seen in many other examples how things can go wrong. Only with AI it could be too powerful that we can afford it to go wrong.
I think we have got some really big questions open, and that also comes down what is going to be the responsibility that the government should take. That, for example, even if we are thinking about IoT and telecommunication and DePIN, perhaps what is the role of countries actually? So it's kind of allocating responsibility. Maybe that's a backstop that we need to think about it. I don't know, David, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this discussion up?
Well, I think DePIN is very exciting. I think AI, generative AI is very exciting. I think Web3 is exciting. And I also think that spatial computing, stroke metaverse are very exciting. But they come together, right? And I'm seeing that roles will emerge over time. I was really impressed with what Nicolas said about, decentralized governance of AI and how important maybe decentralized technologies and Web3 can be as providing trust and governance to AI. I also believe that AI needs to be financed, right? So I think fintech, will play a role there. But also AI needs an interaction point, right? It needs data, which I think will come from us as people and IoT devices. But how will AI manifest and interact with people? It's going to be through personas and avatars and environments, which will be projected by metaverse or spatial computing technologies, giving AI that interaction point. And so I think these things come together is my point. And but it's an exciting time. Not all the pieces are there yet. So I think in terms of governance, we're still working things out as we go, but it's improved a lot since 2018. Right? I think the governance of Web3 and have improved a lot. I think AI, there's still a lot of catching up because we don't know what the potential of this technology is. But I think it's a really exciting time, and I'm seeing now that we're in a time equivalent to 2007, which is the mobile phone, equivalent to cloud, equivalent to so 2007 was the start of the iPhone, not the mobile phone. But I think we're in a time where a lot of technologies are coming together that can really make a difference. But I think decentralization is one of them. I think tokenization is going to be a key part of the economy. And I think DePIN is going to be a key part of infrastructure going forward. But there are some things that we need to work out, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Thank you, definitely. And I think governance is definitely a big aspect that needs to be worked out still. So David, Nicolas, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to have you on to share some insight on DePIN, and hopefully we can progress the conversation as more development are made on the infrastructure side and also on governance as well. We'd like to see like an MVP of governance for DePIN. I think that will be a decentralized governance for DePIN. That will be a really nice project that maybe should be funded by governments.
Thanks for having us. It was a fun discussion. Thank you very, very much, David, for participating. Very, very good insights.